Okay, so it looks like I did a pretty good job of closing most of my open gaps, but there's one area that I forgot about, and that's the outside, right? So this really is all one big open gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shape tool, just take a rectangle, and I'm just going to click and drag out a nice rectangle over the size of my canvas. And I want to make sure that the fill is none. All right, so we did this with the fish, so no fill. And then for your stroke, I would just kind of make sure that it's maybe a little bit thicker, so we can see it. That's fine. So we're going to use that as well. And if you want to play with the profile of that, maybe you skew it a little bit, have some fun with it. That's certainly up to you. All right, so make sure you put some type of border because we're about to clean up our line and add some paint. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to clean up our line work. And to do that, we're going to select all your curves. So I'm going to come over to my layer panel and the top curve is selected. I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom, select the bottom curve. See, they're all selected. If you right mouse click, there's an option to group, or you can hit Control G. It's going to put them all almost like a folder, right? It's going to group them together. If you right mouse click on there and choose rasterize, it now converted your vectors into pixels. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave the vector part of this program and we're going to go into the pixel part of the program. Once you're over here, what you're going to want to do, this is a little tedious, but it is what it is. You're going to take your eraser, you're going to zoom in to any lines that you don't want, and you're going to erase them. All right, it's your left and right bracket key will make your eraser bigger or smaller. So this is really just like Photoshop. So you can just come in, these are pixels. So you just come in and start to clean up your line work. So take some time, clean up your line work, and then we'll look at coloring. As you're erasing or drawing, you can basically paint this part of the program as well. Don't forget about your stabilizer up here. So like if there's an area and you can't get a clean line, you can enable stabilizer. And if you have a mouse or if you're using your finger, it'll stabilize that line for you and give you a nice, neat line. So up to you, you don't have to use it. But again, with a mouse, it's kind of hard to do this stuff sometimes. So if you put stabilizer on, it'll make your life easier. So now I'm at that final stage here. I've cleaned up most of my line, looks pretty good. Now it's time to add color, but there's a few things that we have to be aware of. We're gonna try to fill this with the paint bucket tool. So we'll go over to your tools, and in this program it's called the flood fill, but it's really the same thing. So you take your paint bucket, but one thing you wanna make sure that you do is at your tool options, you do wanna make sure your tolerance is not at 100%. You want to make it low, like 20, 15, 10. Keep it low. And then we're going to start filling. Now, if you have gaps, it's not going to fill accurately. So what I'll do is I'll pick a color and fill. All right, and you can see here it already made a mistake, and I knew that was there, but it's a good example. So if you look, there's just a tiny little gap right there. So I'm going to undo that. So if this happens to you, that's fine. Just undo, Control Z. And then this is Photoshop. So just basically, it's a pixel program. You're going to take your paintbrush, left and right bracket key. So I'll go smaller, get a value of black, and I can see where that gap is. And I'm just going to paint this. Just like in Photoshop, your options are right on top. So if you want the line not to be soft, you just take the hardness and crank it up. Flow, just like Photoshop, how much quote unquote ink is coming out of the brush, opacity. So it's very similar. So I'm just going to take that brush, and I know that there was an issue with the computer here, so I'm going to kind of paint in. It's such a little line. I'll just paint that in. If you want, again, you can always put on your stabilizer if you're using the mouse, and I know it's kind of hard to draw with it, right? Like, so you just take that stabilizer, and it'll give you a nice smooth curve. And then you can jump back to your eraser, and you can clean up that extra line, and you can continue to add your color. All right, so back to my paint. If I click now, let me zoom out. Okay, look, much better. So I'm gonna go through and I'm just gonna add in my base colors. Okay, so basically I've gone through and added all my flat colors. The final step that we're going to do here, we could go in and add shading and lights and shadows, but for now I think we're going to do one more little pass of just line work and we're going to call it a day. Okay, so got my color pass down, line work looks pretty good. Now I have the chance to go back and add any little additional details, right? So I purposely left like the coffee, it's going to be a coffee can. I didn't write coffee on it, and I left some lines and some detail off. So now it's time to go back and add that. So the cool thing with this program is it is kind of like Photoshop and Illustrator in one. So I'm going to bounce back out of pixel mode and get back to my curves, back to my vectors, and I'm going to take some time and add some detail, and then we'll turn it in. There is one thing I do notice that there's definitely some like fringing along the edges. It just has to do with how the program works. There's ways around it, but a little bit out of our wheelhouse. So we'll leave those go. It's fine. There will be a little bit of fringing. So add your color and then add your detail. All right, so I went through and added all my finishing touches, just extra line work, and then I'm going to end it by writing coffee on the coffee can. And the last thing I'll do is when you take the text tool, you just click and type, kind of just like Photoshop. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that coffee, I'm going to make that into a pixel. So right mouse click, I think, if I can do it. Come on, right mouse click, there it is. And then let's rasterize it, makes it a pixel. I'll jump back in. I will zoom in. I'll take my eraser and I'll just kind of get rid of the E that's sticking out of the jar. And then that's it. So to end this, once everything looks pretty good, all you got to do is File. You're going to Export. You're going to choose PNG, and you're going to hit Export. When you export, just make sure you know where you're saving, and that's it. Hand it into Canvas, and you're done. If you have any questions, post in the discussion section.